Thank you very much.
Clerk will call the roll.
Glenn Whitley, County Judge.
Here.
Roy Charles Brooks, Commissioner Precinct 1.
Present.
Andy H. Wynn, Commissioner Precinct 2.
Here.
Gary Fickus, Commissioner Precinct 3.
Here.
J.D. Johnson, Commissioner Precinct 4.
Here.
Constitutes a quorum.
Thank you. Our invocation today will be delivered by Greg Sugar, Tarrant County's own. After the invocation, please remain standing for the pledges.
Heavenly Creator, thank you for all your gifts. Please guide us this Commissioner's Court and the task at hand. We pray for your leadership and guidance. Today especially we ask you to help us remember the words of your servant King Solomon from Proverbs 14:20. Whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly. Lead us to be thoughtful and considerate to those around us. Please guide us with your wisdom. In your heavenly name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Greg. Manius?
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the court, several announcements. Under the Administrator section, item 9A2, we have a revised court communication. We made a minor adjustment on the contract itself. We'll talk about that when we get to that particular point. Also, members of the court, I want to remind you that at 10 o'clock this morning, we have our first of two public hearings. It'll deal with the hospital district's tax rate for FY 2016, and also not FY, but tax year 2016, and also the county's tax rate for tax year 2016. And finally, Your Honor, members of the court, we're going to move things up a little bit on the agenda since we had the public hearings at 10 o'clock. Instead of going directly into my section, we're going to go ahead and go into the briefing section. And when we get to that point, I'd like to make a few comments as it relates to both item A and B, and then we'll ask Mr. Early and the hospital district to come forward and make their proposed budget presentation. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Board members, you have before you the minutes of our regular meeting of August the 16th. Move for approval. Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Commissioner Johnson, I believe you have a recognition.
Yeah, if I could ask Jack Beecham to come forward, please. Since I'm sort of out of air this morning, Jack, I'm going to cut this short, but I want to say congratulations from the court for receiving the National Procurement Institute Award again this year. This is I believe the 19th year in a row that you have received this award, and we're just honored the way that you run your purchasing department and wanted to congratulate you for it. So, any comments from any court members?
Good job, Jack. Good job. And your whole department and all your employees.
I'm almost at loss of words, but I do have a couple of comments.
Of course you do.
I do have something pretty important I'd like, I guess, to maybe set the tone. These are what 4 winning tickets look like to the Arkansas TCU football game before they tear them in half and let you in the stadium.
Who's the winning?
Texas A&M.
Who do you think the winning team is going to be?
Is that being played here?
Yes, sir.
Could we move this along?
Yes, sir. I am very humbled about this and very proud of my staff. This award has been given for 20 years, and we're very honored to receive it. I took a minute to reflect on some things that we've done as a department for Tarrant County.
And it's kind of mind-boggling to me, but I think the most important thing is past and present court members have allowed us to do our job. You've supported us for 20 years, and we don't take that lightly. You learn respect and earn respect every day. Nothing's given to you. Things are much more complicated now than they were 20 years ago. But some of the stuff that we've been able to do with your support, Tarrant County established the first procurement card program in the state of Texas. Tarrant County were the first county to electronically receive bids. Tarrant County, we established our regional co-op, which is over 400, almost 450 members right now. We're the first county to sell our livestock online and name them for county employees. That's been fun.
Thank you very much, Jack.
Oh, my.
The rebate, the program that we established with Staples is outstanding. The long-standing live auction we have in Precinct 4, we brought you the biggest check we've ever brought this year because of our consistency. Greaves and T-Boys years ago actually won IT at a Best Practices Award in Texas Association of Counties. We established the first marketing contract in the county, which has done wonders for the health department. Probably the thing I'm most proud of is we were a driving force to establish our ground and aerial spraying contract for mosquitoes, which has been a topic lately. That's kind of a big deal. Our HUB program, without the use of a diversity program, we've knocked a home run with that program with your support. So thank you for letting us do what we do. We don't plan on letting you down anytime soon, and we do appreciate your support. And I really believe I got the best staff in the state of Texas. And they go to the mat like most Tarrant County employees do every day. That's what we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack.
Commissioner, if you would move to receive and file that.
I'll move to receive and file.
Second.
A motion is second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. You have before you the consent agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. We're going to skip over our public hearings right now and go to the briefing items, Mr. Mangus.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Members of the Court, as we get into both the hospital district's proposed budget presentation and also eventually we're going to also continue to talk about the county's proposed budget. I just want to go over some fact sheets that I placed up on your counter that look like this. You know, a lot of times people don't realize just how efficient we are and mindful of the taxpayers' money, but I'd like to, what we did on this, we did several things. First of all, we wanted to make sure that everyone realized that we are proposing a tax rate decrease of 1 cent, which is almost 3.8% of our tax rate. Also, when we compare ourselves to the 5 counties, big counties in Texas, those counties that have over 1 million population, you'll see this on the first page. You'll find 2 things. First of all, you'll find that Tarrant County has the fewer employees versus the population and of any other county. In fact, we have 1 employee for every 544 citizens in Tarrant County. When you look at our operating budget per capita, you'll also see that Tarrant County has the lowest operating budget per capita of any of the 5 big counties in Texas, which I think is very important because even as our population grows and there's a continued demand for increased services, what we are doing here through your approval of budgets and expenditures, we are keeping that cost per citizen very low, and we're also making sure that the number of our employees do not increase significantly as it relates to the population that increases. If you look on the back page of that, you'll see in a kind of a gray box, or you'll see the second to the last is the percentage over under the effective tax rate. And I think it's important to realize that for a number of years, we have actually passed budgets that are below the effective tax rate. We did that last year. We did that in 2012. We did that in 2011. We did that in 2010. And if you look at those increases that are above the tax rate, or effective tax rate, they have been minimal. Our 254 tax rate that we're offering or recommending to you eventually will be one that is 2.2% above the effective tax rate. Also like to point out how we compare as a county as it relates to tax rates from those other big counties. You'll see that just as the county, not including the hospital district, that in FY16, that we had the second lowest, and the second lowest only to Dallas County. And then finally, when we combine the hospital district's tax rate and also the county's tax rate, which is the bottom box, you'll see that our combined tax rate for both hospital district and Tarrant County, which affects basically the same population, that Tarrant County has the lowest tax rate of any of the 5 large counties in the state of Texas. We continue to try to hold that position in our recommendations today, and as we move forward to the September 13th time period when we're going to ask you to pass that some of these tax rates, then what you'll see is that we will continue to position ourselves well at the lower tier of tax rates for counties that have 1 million or more population. One other thing I'd like to just mention, and Commissioner Wynn, I want to thank you because I was at your town hall meeting the other night and you had run a survey. And while it was an unscientific survey necessarily, I thought it was a good reflection of the people in your community.
Well, thank you for taking the beating for me.
Well, you know, that's what we're here for. But there's some interesting things that we saw, and I know that you've made this available to the court, but I'd like to at least talk to you a little bit about it now. The property tax values in Tarrant County have increased by about 9.8%, 9.6%. That means that there's going to be, in your survey, it said this is expected to increase county revenues. At the same time, costs are increasing while the need for services are growing. 42.7% of the people that were polled, or that responded to the poll, said that their taxes should be lowered, which we have recommended to you. And 57% felt that they should be left as is, and the increased revenue invested in infrastructure or other services. When asked what those services should be, they should be services for senior citizens, they should be for transportation, they should be to pay down the debt that we have, even though we have a very low debt, and also for safety-related issues such as law enforcement. It was also interesting to note that there was a question that was asked on the tax rate for JPS. And the increased 2016 values are expected to increase revenues to fund JPS Health Network. A needs assessment has suggested that JPS facilities may require renovation and expansion. Additionally, with the growing population, costs for healthcare services continue to increase. Of those that responded, 33.8% felt that the tax rate should be lowered. 66.2% felt that it should be left as it is, and the increased revenue be invested in renovation and expansion of JPS facilities and services, possibly lowering the size of any potential bond issuance. So I think we're starting to see that, and when JPS comes up and talks about their budget, they do have an area where they're addressing, where they're putting some cash carry forward in combining it with some monies that they already have in savings that creates the future fund, JPS Future Fund. So whenever we get to those areas within the presentations, just remember that at least this one scientific survey confirms that 2 out of 3 people that answered that survey felt that it was important if we're going to do expansions at JPS, if we can save some money now and basically put it in a fund to be utilized, then the hope is that if we have to go out for a bond package, that package can be lowered, which will decrease the cost of borrowing money, which is a savings to the taxpayer. And with that, setting that tone, Your Honor, I might ask Mr. Early to come forward.
Let me ask just a point before we do this now, as we get, I mean, I think that there are gonna be folks that are gonna be here for our public hearings at 10 o'clock. My preference might be to hold off, and quite honestly, I may ask you to redo what you just did so that everybody has an opportunity to at least hear that as we go into the process. So if we could, I'd rather go through, with the court's permission, I'd rather go through the other areas, try to get that business out of the way, and then move toward that. Is that
something what we'd anticipated was that you would hear the district's budget proposal before the, but we can do.
I would like to hear that. I mean, I would like to hear that before we get to the public hearings, but I think I would rather it be closer to the 10 o'clock hour as opposed to.
So what we'll do is this, Your Honor.
Just go through our other.
Yeah, we have about 20, we should be able to move through a lot of our agenda pretty quickly this morning. And so at about 20 to 25 minutes before 10, at that point, we'll ask JPS to come forward.
I think that'd be great.
Is that
Yes, that'd be
satisfactory?
great.
Could I just comment that I think this fact sheet that you put together is one of the most useful tools I've seen in a long time when it comes to budgeting. We've not had this information in this format before, and it demonstrates graphically. I'm a visual kind of person. It demonstrates graphically how we stand compared to others and how we stand compared to our growth in population and our growth in revenues. And I find it fascinating and extremely useful. Thank you for putting this together.
Commissioner, this is what we meant when we say evidence-based decision-making. This is exactly what we meant. I do have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Of all the counties that you are comparing Canton County to, have you taken into consideration homestead exemptions? Are those rates? Have we considered that?
We have not done that yet. Quite frankly, we will do that in the future. Maybe we can have some revised information as we move forward. Commissioner, we're going to do that. We just didn't have enough time for this one. But
Right.
We've got 2 weeks before our next meeting, and so we'll try to do that.
Right. So the fact that other counties like Dallas County offer a 20% homestead exemption.
Yes.
Okay. So their rate may be higher or lower, whatever, but that one important factor has not taken into consideration when we compare the tax rates. And it's too late for us to really talk about and adopt a homestead exemption this year, correct?
That's correct. It has to be done before July 1st if we're going to do it.
But we do have a homestead exemption for senior citizens and for disabled, and we do have a senior citizen tax freeze. So when you put those two items together, I would imagine, just anecdotally, I would think that we compare favorably with others who just give a percentage exemption.
For individuals that are 65 years or older, for homestead exemptions.
Like me.
Yes,
Let's
sir.
not do that.
We give $50,000. There's a $50,000 exemption for those individuals.
Okay, thank you.
Plus the tax freeze.
And GK, if I don't see it on here, but probably the average tax rate total in the county is 260, 270, 280. But we're 9%,
About 9%.
8 or 9%.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
of the total tax burden. Some people think because they write the check to us, that it's all us. We're
I blame Mr.
We're
Wright.
one- we're
I
less
blame
than
Mr. Wright for
1/10.
taking money.
Right it to him.
Well, and we save millions of dollars for the taxpayers by Mr. Wright collecting for all those taxing entities. So it does result in people thinking that they're paying us all the taxes, but it saves, ultimately in the long run, it saves millions of dollars for the other taxing entities.
Commissioner Fickus, we'll get that number. Commissioner Quinn will also look at the homestead exemption issue, and we'll try to get some more numbers back to you shortly.
And as we begin to move into our business, I'm going to make this comment several times. If you are planning on making a comment in the public comment section of our public hearings, please know that there are forms out there that you need to fill out so that we can be sure and recognize you as we hit those times in our meetings. Okay, Mr. Manius, then we'll begin with your area.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Your Honor, members of the court, we have 3 items to bring to you this morning. Our first one, we're requesting that the Commissioners Court approve the TexShare Indigent Defense Project Addendum between Tarrant County and the Texas Conference of Urban Counties TexShare Program.
Move for approval.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Members of the court, if we can go to item number 2. We're requesting that the Commissioners Court approve a consulting agreement with Health Management Associates as it relates to RFP number 2016-130 for long-range planning and analysis related to the Tarrant County Hospital District.
Move approval.
Second, with one question.
Yes, sir.
Have we determined the timeline yet, or is that going to be done later?
No, the timeline, that is one of the additions that we entered into the contract. This contract begins, if it's approval today, it begins today, and the timeline is 6 months.
Okay, 6 months.
Yes, sir.
But we have not determined the beginning date.
Beginning date is
Today.
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 And
So
we've
the
talked,
okay.
yes, we've talked with HMA, and they're ready to start.
Okay, thank you.
GK,
Yes, sir.
and maybe this is premature, we talked about setting up our committees. When will we be doing that?
The Blue Ribbon Committee is something that we need to start focusing on. I would suggest that we begin those to actually start formulating the individuals that you want on there and do that sometime in October. We're currently running or drafting the second RFP, and it should be ready within 2 to 3 weeks, maybe. And so I think what we'd like to do is have everything in place and the Blue Ribbon Committee start about 2 months before the final report comes out. Because we want the Blue Ribbon Committee to receive information from not only HMA, but also from the other contractor that we'll be dealing with. So I would suggest that we look sometime in October, mid to late October, to name that committee.
Okay. And the way we're going to do that is each one of us are going to appoint 2, and then collectively we're going to elect
Appoint the
and
chairman.
determine and appoint the chairman.
Yes, sir. And then there'll be 2 liaisons. Our recommendation is 2 liaisons from the court and 2 liaisons from the Board of Managers of the hospital district.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Finally, Your Honor, members of court, on item number 3, we're requesting that the Commissioners Court approve changes to the ME's fee schedule, which will become effective October 1st, 2016.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ms. Tidwell?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We have 2 items that we're asking you to consider this morning. The first is to receive and file the quarterly investment report for the period ended June 30th of 2016.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
And our second item is we're asking you to receive and file the auditor's report related to the Tarrant Appraisal District appraisal system. And I just wanted to have this information given to you for 2 reasons. One, there's been some articles in the newspaper, but there really isn't one public place from the county's perspective this information is available. And to me, it's a very serious situation that could have ramifications for several years. The other thing is it certainly made estimating revenue this year a challenge. It's always a challenge, the crystal ball. But with the changes that keep occurring, and then the incident that even occurred on Friday, and then yesterday, when you have a new change in delete tape received by the tax office that had over 12,000 changes, 12,000 accounts, and had a total refund back to the taxpayers for $13 million. That's not just the county's portion, but for all taxes, because previous bills and information in the system were incorrect, from the best we can tell, and that continues to be an ongoing situation. And I had to adjust revenue even yesterday for the numbers that I'd given the budget office because of the county's portion of that $13 million, which my best guess today is somewhere around $1.4 million. Then that's a very serious situation related to the accuracy of the information received from TAD. There is no choice but to use the July 25th certified roll, which we did in our revenue estimates. Any future updates from TAD, barring the September certified roll, if we were to receive one, which is too late for you, we're going to ignore unless we see something that changes our opinion on that, because the numbers are just all over the place from time to time, and that is a concern. There's nothing that I personally, of course, can do about it, nor you. But I think the public really needs to understand, and at some point in time there would be an accounting associated with this because of the nature that these numbers are permanent legal information and data that affects, obviously, what y'all are here to talk about today, what people pay in taxes, and the fact that we continue to see inconsistencies and changes that swing different directions that really make us question the validity and the validity of the data. But again, quantifying that and determining precisely what's wrong is almost impossible at this point. So it may take years for things to work out. If you have one property like last month that the exemption was taken off and then it was put back on, and it results in a swing of $1 million in taxes to one property because we have the wrong information in the system, I'm not sure how you fix that until eventually everyone looks at their tax bill and determines that they think for their information it's accurate. So
And
again,
when you say wrong, we have wrong information in the system. It's not, is it we or is it TAD? As a
the
result of
information
numbers
that-
we've got from TAD.
it's a result of numbers we receive from TAD. Everything that goes in related to property values by statute is, of course, received from TAD. The tax office doesn't put anything into their system other than what's received from TAD. TAD is the final definitive appraisal and provider of information related to exemptions and values and all kinds of social things that affect what people ultimately pay in taxes. The exemptions are just as important in many ways, if you think about it, as the values, because without the proper exemptions on your property, whether you're entitled or not entitled to that exemption, it clearly determines what you owe, and that's a large part of what we've seen recently and in the past associated with these refunds. But if you think about the quantity of refunds that the tax office is going to have to issue, and my office is going to have to be involved in reviewing and auditing, $13 million for the receipt of that NCD that the tax office got last week, that's an enormous burden, even administratively, on county staff. And then having to give that money back. And many of these entities right now at this time of the year, we don't have the kind of money in our coffers to write those checks back to the taxpayer, and so we'll have to recoup that money from the entities as we go forward when we resend out the school district, for example, or another small city, because these refunds affect all of the counties, all of the county, and all of the entities which the county collects for. So, and Mr. Wright, if you want to say something, please.
Thank you, May. Everything she just said is correct. And to give you an example of the magnitude, I keep using the word unprecedented with regard to the data we get from the appraisal district. I've kind of worn it out. In June, we went through 3 supplemental rolls before they finally got it right. We're working on the July supplemental roll now. And the first part of that was real property and business property was 5,000 accounts that changed or added exemptions. They finally got caught up on their exemptions, and in 1 month, and this isn't next year's property. This is adjustment to the former roll, and that's why.
You mean last year's?
Last year's, and in 2014 as well. And so they're making these corrections on exemptions, over 5,000 of them, which results in about $8 million in refunds. And when we get something in the tax office of that magnitude, that's a kick in the pants. Because the loss is not only in the refund, but the additional cost to the county for us to have to do that many refunds. It's an enormous amount of work. And then the second part of that was when they dropped a lot of the Chesapeake mineral accounts, just dropped them from the roll. Now, we are trying to get an answer from them now on, are they going to follow up and add that value back with individual accounts? Or is this a permanent drop from the roll? If it's a permanent drop from the roll, that's significant.
And to that end, I think Mr. Manius may have called Jeff Law on that, chief appraiser, because when we looked at the mineral values last year, they were about $2.7 billion. And this year, they dropped to less than $1 billion. It was like $907 million.
Right.
So since most of the minerals, I believe, in Tarrant County are of a gas nature.
That's correct.
The value of gas did not go down that dramatically from last year to this year. So I'm trying to figure out why all of a sudden we lost 2/3 of the value in, and didn't Mr. Law tell you?
I spoke to an individual and Mr. Law is not there today, but I spoke to one of his staffers and asked him, quite frankly, are all the Chesapeake accounts on or not? And his comment was they didn't know exactly, that they thought they had about 3,000 of the accounts on 3,500.
Understand that Pritchard and Abbott does all of the mineral evaluations for the appraisal district. The appraisal district staff doesn't actually do that work. And so this was a mineral account dump from Pritchard and Abbott. Now, they do one every year, but we've never seen one of this magnitude before.
Well, I
But
read through the
that's where it's
report.
coming from.
I read through the report, and I talked to a lot of taxpayers in my precinct who have major concerns about TAG. And these problems are very alarming because they compromise the integrity of our county and erode the public trust in our system. And these problems just didn't occur this year.
No.
It occurred last year, the year before, and the year before. So that tells me that is a systemic problem, okay, that cannot be ignored. So is there any recourse for this body to do anything, or we just going to have to suck it up and drive on?
Let me just say this, and thanks to our county administrator, they're undergoing an audit right now of the new Momentum system. These problems began when they did that software conversion in October of 2014. 2015 was the first full tax year that we were under Momentum. And as I've reported before, it was an unmitigated nightmare. There were so many problems, and part of it was systemic. Most of it was systemic. A lot of it was data entry issues, but the problems we're seeing now are on the monthly supplements. And so they hired a consultant to work just those things, and he's doing a great job in my opinion, but obviously they still have a ways to go. But the audit, I hope, will reveal what's left to be done to fix this system.
I think that we should, maybe as a court at a minimum, consider writing a letter to the appraisal board, just basically expressing our displeasure and lack of confidence to some extent in the numbers that we're receiving.
I would welcome that.
And because I've talked, in generalities with with one of the board members, about how, maddening it is to see the changes from one role to the next.
The problem is when the base of a TIF changes from one year to the next.
Well, the information associated with this is awful. And I have to say, I'm not quite as optimistic as Mr. Wright. And I don't think the audit's going to be what we need. It may be a starting point. But with the kinds of things that I've seen, I really do have concerns that we will be dealing with this for several years to come. Because again, the information, the database, and the information is so large that if something is wrong, if there is some sort of problem, finding it and fixing it is not simple.
Is it just simply technology related?
Well, it started with the implementation of the new system. I have no idea all of the things that are going on. Again, the report references a couple of things that they did when they started with the new system that obviously in hindsight we would question and wish they would have done something different. But once you get to this point and how you get out of it, again, we can hope that the audit and the consultant help them with that. But again, they've been previous to this time, there's been a hesitancy on the part that I've seen from the appraisal district to actually own up and accept that we have a problem and that we need to address it. Because you have to put a lot of resources to a problem if you're going to really identify and fix it. Again, from the county's perspective, we cannot say that the numbers are not materially accurate, but for individuals and for the changes that go in and out and the volume of the changes, there's certainly an enormous problem, in my opinion, with the detail, with the data. And how that gets resolved, I don't know. But I do think that we have the potential to be looking at this for several years. Again, your revenues that you're going to have today to approve your budget on, my staff have worked really hard, for example, with all of y'all's staff and the county staff to close all kinds of open POs, shorted POs. It's where the bulk of the money came out of, the additional money that I was able to give the county on Friday, which was about $2.5 million. Of that 2.5 that we had, a little less than that, 2.2, a majority of that, we'd already taken out $700,000 for what we knew the refunds were on Friday. And then yesterday when we received and looked and saw that we had another $700,000, again, potentially $1.4 million in tax revenue that the county was going to have to get back on these refunds that we're talking about. Then I had to lower the revenue estimates, and I sent y'all that email yesterday that said I had to lower the amount again another $700,000 for a total of 1.4.
These refunds are not from this year, they're from last year's.
Yes, or prior years.
So it has taken them that long to get their information fixed.
That's right.
And sent to us so that we can make these refunds to taxpayers who basically it was 2 years and plus.
These appraisal districts, statewide appraisal districts, were created by a statute passed by the state legislature. It took the authority of setting the valuation on various properties from the counties and gave it to regional appraisal authorities. Is there a state agency to whom these appraisal districts are responsible? They're all independent? There's no overarching body that supervises and holds them accountable?
There's two things. One, the chief appraisers themselves are under TDLR. That's the Texas Department of Registration and Certification. License and Certification, yeah. They're under that. And so anyone can, including a government body, can complain to TDLR about the way a chief appraiser is doing their job. Secondary to that, though, is the state controller's office. They do an audit of all the appraisal districts for the school districts. It's part of the school finance mechanism that's in place. And to ensure that the appraisal districts are appraising property at market value. We found out last year that Tarrant Appraisal District was under, and so they were put on notice by the state. They were given a 1 year of grace, and basically to ensure that they would bring their property values up to market value.
And that's why we have such a dramatic increase in valuations showing up this year, because they had to go back and adjust the valuations to 100% of market, which is...
The appraisal district would, I believe, deny that, because legally you can't make up. The value each year is whatever the value is that year. But they are confident.
You're given 1 year to correct your system so that you are now appraising at 100% of market, then you've got to make up that deficit some kind of way.
Well, and Jeff Law, he actually was given 2 years.
2 years.
And Jeff Law made the comment in a public hearing that he decided to make it in 1 year.
That's correct.
That is correct statement.
That is a correct statement.
So he was given 2 years, but instead of keeping, to be more sensitive with the financial constraints of the taxpayers,
Yeah.
he decided to make the increase in 1 year.
Right.
Causing
There-
all these major concerns that we have.
You'll
to deal with.
recall last year, there were a lot of newspaper articles about the loss of millions of dollars to the school districts because properties were undervalued in 2015.
And the legislature argues that there was no loss to the school districts because they made them whole last year as a result of that.
It did not affect the state portion of the funding. Now, the school districts, I think, would argue that at the local level, there was loss in funding. So it's the values for school districts, that is a whole different animal than it is for cities and counties, because it's suppressed anyway. Anyway, that's kind of beside the point. Everything that Renee just said is absolutely correct. I'll tell you that while tremendous progress has been made since 2014, they're not out of the woods yet. They know that. They know there's still significant problems with their monthly supplements. And only time will tell how quickly they're going to get completely out of the woods on this, to a point where we and the taxing entities have confidence in the data that they give us.
So are we gonna write the letter?
I think I would like for you to draft a letter in working with them that we send to the appraisal board. And with that, I'm going to ask do we have a motion and a second? I need a motion and a second to receive and file.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Could I make a comment, please?
Certainly.
I think we've done a great job of describing the symptoms of the problem. I'd like to see us investigate, maybe with the district attorney's office in conjunction with the auditor's office and the tax assessor collector and the administrator's office, what the heck we can do about this. If we don't do that, then all we've done this morning is a bunch of CYA stuff.
We can explore that.
is not helpful.
Let us come forward with a recommendation.
Okay.
Please.
Any other discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Your Honor, we have about 10 minutes till 10. If we could you like to move now to the presentation by the hospital district board? Or would you like to continue until, the deal is on the public hearings, you can't hold them prior to 10 o'clock, but you can
Okay.
hold them anytime 10
Let's
o'clock.
go ahead and go through some of the rest of our business, and try to get as much of that done before our public hearings.
Move to receive and file personnel agenda.
Second.
We have a motion, a second, receive and file personnel agenda. Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Good morning and thank you. We have two additional items. The second item, we're asking the court to to approve a waiver of terminal benefits for CDC 2. Judge Salvan's court coordinator is going to retire at the end of this month with 400 vacation hours. The judge is requesting a waiver of those 400 hours at an estimated cost to the general fund of approximately $14,500.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Third item, I'm going to ask Ms. Worthy if she'll come and discuss that with you.
Try to be quick with this. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm here to seek approval for our plan choices and our designated service providers, as well as our contribution rates and funding for both our retiree and employee medical plans for 2017. As I go through the exhibits, I'll ask for your approval for each exhibit. There are no significant changes to our plan designs. However, I will highlight a few points. As has been the practice in the past, the PEBC director and Willis Towers Watson met with us and gave us the information on our funding requirements, and then the committee met to bring these recommendations to you. So if you'll go to Exhibit A, this contains the list of our current service providers. It shows the comparisons of monthly rates from 2016 to 2017. We have only 2 rate changes, and I'll highlight those. So on page 2, number 6, that is the stop loss, and we did have an increase there of approximately 9%. Our second item I would like to highlight on Exhibit A is on page 2, number 7. This is our pharmacy. This reflects a continuation of services through Express Scripts. However, in this past year, with the assistance of Willis Towers Watson, the PEBC did conduct an RFP, and then there was a committee that reviewed those responses and voted on which should be the service provider, and it was Express Scripts again. The pricing is going to continue through 2019 for that service. If you'll go to page 3, and please stop me if you have questions. I know I'm trying to get through this quickly for you. On page 3, number 14, this is our Medicare eligible retiree plans. These are our fully insured plans. The increases range from 3 to 4%. That's the final item I want to point out on Exhibit A, and I would request your approval of Exhibit A.
Move for approval.
Second. We have a motion, a second. Discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Exhibit B is the dental plan, and there are no changes for this in 2017, so we request your approval of Exhibit B.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Exhibit C1, this is our employee medical plans, and this includes a comparison of rates between 2016 and 2017. This is a continuation of our split of 80-20 that we have had for the past several years. It does reflect an approximate increase of 18%. The claims were projected to be significantly higher, or the claims have proven to be significantly higher than projected. They actually expect our claims to have increased by 25%. The rate changes are displayed in yellow, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about that.
We're just a hair under the 20-80 split right now. I think the employees are paying somewhere just a little north of 19%. We kept it pretty much at the same percentages last year, but we are still trying to eventually get to the 20-80. And as Robin said, our claims increased by approximately 25%. So we're going to really try to focus on some things that we're bringing. We've got the nurse line. I'm not sure how many people realize you can call a nurse before you head for the doctor. This year we've also actually added, or in the process right now of adding, the doctor. You can actually I think you can actually call a doctor and talk with a doctor. before you head off to the,
Yes,
to
sir.
the,
It's Doctors on Demands, and it's basically a virtual appointment.
yeah.
So I would request approval of Exhibit C1.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
We have two Exhibit C2s. The first one is the pre-65 retiree plans. This is our grandfather group. We only have one individual left in this plan, and it does reflect the standard 15% increase that we normally include, and those rates are highlighted. So I would seek approval of this document.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussions? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Our next document, also C2, this is our years of service matrix. This is for our pre-65 retirees. It does reflect a 10% increase over 2016. The premium changes are displayed in yellow. I'd be happy to answer questions or seek your approval for this document.
Move for approval.
And again, there's only one person in this category.
No, sir, this is, that has 271. These are our pre-65 retirees.
Pre-65.
The majority are down in the 25-plus years,
Yes, sir.
and we're maintaining the 2080 cost share.
Did you get a second?
No, sir.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Our next exhibit, C3, this is our Medicare-based retiree medical plans, again, the fully insured programs. For GASB purposes, we have applied a soft cap to the county's portion of this, and we did again this year. Again, the rates are highlighted in yellow, and I'd be happy to answer questions or seek approval.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Our final item is Exhibit D. There are no premium changes for the dental or vision.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Vinnie.
Good morning, Your Honor, and members of the court.
Morning.
We have one item before you for approval. It is the amendment number 3 to our FY15 Public Health Fee Schedule. There's a new service that we added on, the Comprehensive Metabolic Panel, and we're requesting approval for those fees.
Move approval.
Second. We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Jack?
We have three items for your consideration this morning. Our first item is a bid award recommendation for bid 2016-165, signing a contract for temporary kitchen personnel. Recommendation to be toward a free enterprise basis according to the primary and secondary vendors meeting specifications as shown in your court communication.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Number two is an item in regards to RFP 2013-098, RFP for drug and alcohol laboratory confirmation testing for CSCD. We're asking for a 60-day contract extension while they are negotiating the contract on the new RFP, which we will bring to you for consideration in September.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Last item in regards to RFP 2016-150, Tarrant County Business Intelligence and Big Data Analytics Strategic Initiative. We are recommending rejection of the 12 proposals that we received, seeking permission to rebid. The lowest proposal came in at $125,000 above budget.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Jack. Court members, are there any appointments today? Being none, then you have before you the claims, including the addendum.
Move approval of the claims, including the addendum.
Second.
A motion, a second, to approve the claims, including the addendum. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Briefing items, Mr. Manus?
Thank you, Your Honor. If we could go now into the JPS presentation. This is the FY 2017 proposed budget presentation. Ask Mr. Early to come forward initially.
Yeah, maybe not.
We finally got to you, Robert.
I'm good. I'm good. I come to y'all with, we take the budget process very seriously, but I come to you with great butterflies in my stomach because at 10 o'clock, my daughter is driving across town for the first time because she got her license yesterday. So I don't mean to make this sound pale, but I want to see what happens.
You got your phone with you?
Yeah, I do.
I'm so glad that we're in here.
Exactly. And we did have a little bit of ability to orchestrate the time, so I wanted to protect y'all. And
So is Mama following her?
she is. So yes. I promise she is. And when she took her driving test, Mama videoed the whole thing too and sent it to me.
Well, congratulations to.
Thank you. I need to stop making comments on a public comment that my wife can see.
Well, I was going to say, you do realize that she is going to be watching this at some point in time. Even if she hadn't planned to, everybody will tell her to watch it.
That's exactly right.
You're in
So,
trouble.
If any of y'all will have room at your house, I would appreciate it. I do want to personally thank you as commissioners. I want to thank your staffs for the amount of time that you've dedicated to meeting with us, talking with us, and going over this budget. I also want to thank our Board of Managers under the leadership of Ralph Emerson and Charlie Powell, our Vice Chair, and Steve Montgomery, the Chair of Finance, for the amount of dedication and work they've put into this in the budget hearings and the retreats and the work that we've done. Also, I'm incredibly proud of Sharon Clark, our CFO. In the last 13 months at being at JPS, she has made significant benefit to JPS, and I'm proud of her and her efforts, her methodical and pragmatic approach to the budget. And I'd like to introduce Sharon at this time to allow Sharon to come up and present to you some of the aspects and items of our budget.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Good morning.
Good
Thank you
morning.
for your time. I'm going to try not to hit this but once. So just interrupt me with questions. I've been told I have about 10 minutes this morning, so I'll try not to take much more time than that. But I think the important points are on this slide, and I'll cover some of these points in more detail as I go through the presentation. But most importantly, the hospital district did budget a positive operating margin for 17. We do have a full year of our new physician organization acclaim for 17. We did have to invest another $5 million in an additional operating losses in acclaim. But our board of managers as well as senior administration targets the hospital's operating margin at about 1% every year. And what we did is we raised that target so that we could cover that additional $5 million. I've got a slide to explain that in a little bit more detail. But we did increase the medical center's margin to cover the additional investment that we made with our employed physician company Acclaim. We're going to also talk about the JPS Future Fund, which Mr. Manius already spoke of, and that is to help set aside cash that we will use for our future building fund. Whether or not we are able to proceed with the bond issue, JPS has major construction needs that we will need to begin addressing in the next few years. From expanded services, we're going to be opening the True Worth Clinic, hopefully at the end of this calendar year. It serves our most vulnerable population down on East Lancaster. It will include dental services as well as pharmaceuticals, And that is where a lot of the homeless population is addressed as well. Our Northeast Medical Home will continue design and construction this year, and we will hopefully begin opening that newly constructed facility at the end of December of 17. So we're about 15 months away from that opening. And you'll see here in a new slide that we continue to have extreme ED volumes. And we are going to expand our current ED by about 15 rooms. We have shelf space that will be opening up, and that will hopefully take care of some of that growth pain. So in our statistics, the ones that I do want to point out to you, the psych patient days have increased by about 11%. You can see on the second line. That is due to us opening up an additional 36 beds this December. So that's where that growth comes from. It's just a full year impact. Surgeries continue to increase. We've got about a 4% increase there. About 60% of those are outpatient, but we are reaching capacity. And then the second from the last is emergency visits. 121,000 visits. In 2008, we saw 166 patients a day in our ED. In 16, we're seeing almost 330 patients a day. There's a lot of people going through there. In addition, we have an urgent care center that we've offloaded another 57,000 a year. So,
those are patients who would be in the emergency room, but for the urgent care center.
I believe so. Yes, they're very closely located on our main campus. So, without it, a lot of them would be in the ED.
Is there any correlation between the population increase and these statistics at all?
There are some, but they are not perfectly correlated.
Okay.
Tarrant County, just in the last few months, has had a huge utilization of emergency room visits. There's not one driver of that, and just across the nation, ED visits continue to escalate. Our clinic visits, you can see we have almost a little over 35 primary care and specialty clinics throughout the county. And, we're trying to direct people to get the right care at the right time at the right place. But a lot of people end up at our emergency room.
And what factor drives the 11.71% increase in the budgeted psych patient days?
From the psych patient days, we opened an additional 36 beds this January. So it's just a full year impact. They were immediately full when we expanded those inpatient beds.
It's a reflection of demand that has not been able to be served prior to the opening of these 36 beds, except perhaps in the county jail.
Correct. Just as a reminder, our revenue comes from 4 places. About 40% comes from our tax revenue. About 40% comes from patient revenue sources such as Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial payers. We have other sources of revenue that are provided like DISH, urgent care, and our district projects from national sources as well as state sources. And other revenue is the tobacco funds, MHMR, and some grant sources. So I'm not going to read you this slide, but overall we have inflationary impacts. Our total compensation has increased about 3% with a merit increase that we give our employees. We have approximately 5,500 employees currently, And within this new budget, we've requested 56 new FTEs, so a very small growth in total. Professional fees are those fees that we pay our physicians to see patients within JPS and to provide coverage. It also is the intergovernmental transfer that we make on behalf of those hospitals within our county that we push up for our urgent care payments to come back down from the federal government. And you'll see that those increased about
Uncompensated care.
uncompensated care payments.
You said urgent.
I'm sorry, uncompensated care. And those increased about $5 million, which you'll see on the next slide. In purchase service, a lot of our patient equipment that we put in service last year has come out of manufacturer's warranty and has increased our expense by about $2 million. Medical supplies and drugs increased $4.5 million, or 4.5%. We've had about a $2 million savings included in this budget. So we are constantly looking for savings, especially in these expense areas. Other expenses are reduced. And when you look at the hospital's income statement, you can see that in the 17 budget column, we have an operating margin of $13.7 million and an excess of revenue for a bottom line of $20.8 million. We are projected to end this year at approximately $35 million on a $21 million budget. For the Acclaim income statement, this is our physician organization. Most of our providers that were in JPS-PG moved over to Acclaim this year. You'll see that we had 171 providers for 16. And for 17, we're projected to have 377 providers. We are employing or making offers of employment to those physicians that provide services at JPS that are currently employed by the UNT Health Science Center. That is where the majority of those new physicians are coming from in 17. So, and you can see that the 16 to 17 loss will go from $3.6 million to $8.2 million. Again, that loss per provider is about $20 million or $20,000 a year. So the increased loss, the variance column, the $4.6 million, as I mentioned on my first slide, will be funded by the medical center. So the medical center's total operating revenue is just under $900 million. Our internal target is 1%, which would have been about $9 million for the medical center. We added the $5 million increase for Acclaim to fund that, and that's why we ended up at a hospital operating margin of $14 million this year. Yes, sir.
Back to the Acclaim income statement and the $4.6 million loss, which we've covered by a $5 million contribution from the general fund. What are your projections for break even of Acclaim? How long are we going to have to subsidize it?
The goal for Acclaim, from my standpoint, MGMA, which is a national company, does a survey. Currently, the median loss per provider is $75,000 compared to the Acclaim 20. That was my checkpoint when we were doing our budget. I certainly would never want to go above the $20,000 per provider, and we will always strive to continue to reduce that as much as we can.
So That, a claim will always generate some loss.
It may generate some loss. We will be looking at compensation, we will be looking at overhead, we will be looking at efficiencies to try to get that per provider loss as minimalistic as we possibly can.
And this loss has to do with the reimbursement rates for physicians from the various sources that these reimbursements come from. Is that correct?
Correct. And, you know, a lot of it has to do with our payer mix. We do have a lot of self-pay patients at JPS that do not have funding. We have, and there are certain types of physicians that are very difficult to recruit. Most hospital systems across the nation do have a physician group that is employed, that is associated, that helps with coverage of their patients from a hospital and a physician coverage type arrangement.
So the $20,000 loss per provider that we're experiencing from a claim is light years better than the $75,000 per provider, which is the industry average, just median.
It's the median from MGMA.
We're doing a lot better with a claim than other organizations are doing with their physician groups.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, on average.
Thank you.
And the average is just above 70,000.
Thank you.
So what are the key advantages that JPS will gain by operating a loss physician group entity? What's the trade-off?
The largest advantage that I see is we will be able to have dedicated physicians that will be able to provide services to the JPS patients that we serve,
and therefore
both
improve
inpatient and on the outpatient. A claim also is focused on quality standards as well as behavior standards.
And research.
And the GME factor that will always continue to be a large part of who JPS is.
GME meaning the teaching
The
portion.
teaching component.
Right.
Thank you. Yes.
For which there is no reimbursement.
So from a combined income statement, we've talked about the hospital. And again, the operating margin is kind of the next to the bottom highlighted, $13.7 million, a claim at an $8.2 million loss. We do have a foundation which fundraises for us and provides about $250,000 worth of funding for a system total of $5.6 million. If you drop down to the bottom line, excess of revenue over expenses, $12.8 million. We do have routine capital spend. We're having construction of $22.3 million. The largest component of that, I mentioned on the first slide, was the finish out of the Northeast facility. We'll be constructing that for about the next 15 months. And then patient care equipment of $44.5 million, $22 million of that, over 50%, is specific to equipment that will be used for direct patient care, and about 25% is IT that relates to our electronic medical record and supporting patient care. So the Future Fund is something that we have packaged to make it a lot more visible from a commitment that this is what we are growing, at least on this one slide. It is a board-designated fund that we have set aside $91.5 million from a depreciation fund. $19.8 million from a renovation fund, and then another $14 million will be added to that, which will be the excess of the 16 budget. And we will package this. Again, it will be board designated, and this will be the start of the JPS Future Fund that will help us with any future major capital renovation.
At what rate do you see growing this fund? At least at this same rate annually? Or
Yes,
more?
we will definitely evaluate it at least annually. And as we had meetings with each one of you individually in preparation for my presentation today, we will be looking at excess operating cash as well as we get closer to whether there is a bond issue or whether we are just getting ready to do something from a
Making
master
improvements and stuff
facility
along that line.
renovation.
So I would
Either
assume
way.
that to some of Commissioner Brooks's questions, I think annually you would be adding any excess revenue over what you had budgeted.
Correct.
Plus depreciation for that current year. So those would be the two numbers that we would be looking, and then the board may make some additional recommendations as that would go forward.
Correct.
I think this is a good strategy by squeezing cash from our operation to fund any additional capital improvements. This is the practice of this court.
Right.
Has been for a long time.
Yes.
Right? So, thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I do have our tax rate schedule, which you guys are more than familiar with. We are currently at 22.79 cents per $100 of assessed value. We are not recommending a change at this point. Our budget has been based on the historical tax rate as I presented it.
Any questions?
Can you speak to the stability of the JPS's revenue sources, particularly the 1115 waiver?
If I could speak to that, I should be a consultant.
We hired one of those today.
Don't go over to the dark side.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'd be a good consultant. I will give you my opinion, and it's not Mr. Early's opinion, it is only mine. I've been in healthcare for over 25 years, and we have called state and federal funding by many different terms. I do believe that the 1115 waiver is coming to an end. I do not know what it will look like in the future, but I would guess that they will repackage it. I think when they moved from the old UPL, the upper payment limit, to the uncompensated care and the 1115 waiver that we are in today, that was a big improvement because it's much more pay for performance, and it raised the bar so the people who did better things got paid for it and got rewarded. I think the next iteration of the waiver will increase that pay for performance component, and JPS has done very well under those criteria. But I do not know what the 1115 waiver will turn into. I do know that they've extended it for one more year, which will be our fiscal year 17, and another quarter. So we've kind of got another 15-month extension of the 1115 waiver where it should have originally ended. And we will continue through December of 17 under the 1115 waiver. as it is.
That affects about 17 million, 17% of the total revenue also?
Yes, the 17% includes disproportionate share as well and uncompensated care. Yes, so the waiver is the district projects as well as uncompensated care. Those two components are the 1115 waiver. And then you also add in disproportionate share.
I just want to make a statement that because of that uncertainty, okay, from my perspective, we have to look at the long-term stability of JPS. And that's why we have to be very cautious when we decide to lower the revenue at JPS, because it may cause long-term harm to the organization and our ability to cater the needs of our population, which we'll know will add another 1 million, from 1.9 million to 3 million in the next 20 years or so. So because of that uncertainty, we have to be very cautious in doing that. So I just want to make sure that I make that clear.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I agree with Commissioner Wynn.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
With that, GK, do we want to go ahead and move into the public hearings, or?
Yes,
do you want to?
Did you want him to do his deal again?
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about the stuff that you had mentioned earlier? I've got 3 audience participations right now. I would again remind you that if you're here and you wish to speak in the public hearings, you do need to fill one of these out and hand it to somebody who'll take it.
Right here. We'll take it.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the court, I'll just be brief on this, but we had provided some material for the court this morning, and look at a fact sheet that we have put together. It looks somewhat like this.
And you have copies of these if anybody would like. Is that on the board?
We have some more copies here, and we'd be more than happy to provide those. Let's make sure that the 3 speakers.
GK, do you have it on the screen?
I don't have it on the screen.
Would you take it, hey, Roderick, there are 3 people back there who are going to speak. Let's be sure they get them, as opposed to, we can make copies for our internal folks.
Just a quick note, just to remind the court that as we go into the public hearings today on the Tarrant County piece, that the Commissioners Court has voted for an outside tax rate, which is a decrease in taxes from 0.264 to 0.54. This actually represents about 3.8% decrease in the overall tax rate as it currently is. Some of the things that I'd like to point out to you, and we'll go back to the front sheet, and we'll talk about how that Tarrant County compares as it relates to the 5 big counties in Texas. And 5 big counties are described as those counties that have a population of 1 million or more. As you'll note, 2 things on the first chart, 2 very positive things, is that the number of full-time equivalents or employees to the population ratio, Tarrant County has 1 employee for 544 citizens. We have the largest spread, which is actually a very good sign, that we have fewer employees per capita than any of the other 4 large counties in the state of Texas. When you look at the operating budget per capita, you'll also see that Tarrant County at $283 has the lowest operating budget per capita for, as it compares to the 5 big counties in the state. That's important to realize, because what that means is that through the budget process that we've had over the years, that we have been able to keep our expenses very low, even as the population has increased. And we know that as populations increase, demand for governmental services increases also. If you look on the second sheet or the back page, the information that's contained in the beige area, I would ask that you focus on the bottom, the second to the last line, which is the percent of taxes as it relates to over or under of the effective tax rate. If you will look since 2007 and compare 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2016, we have actually had a tax rate that was below the effective tax rate. In other words, we brought in less money on those properties that were taxed the previous year than we had than in prior years. Also, when you look at Tarrant County's tax rate as it relates to the Big Five, if you will, you'll notice that our tax rate, our current tax rate, not the one we're recommending, the one we're recommending is less than this particular amount, is the second lowest of all the big counties in the state. I think more importantly, because each of those counties also have a hospital district, that if you look at the combination of the county tax rate plus the hospital district tax rate, which is really a taxation on the same group of individuals, that when you add those two numbers together, Tarrant County, with the combination of hospital district and the county, has the lowest tax rate of the Big Five counties in the state. This is not something that has just happened recently. This is something that we continue to look at and monitor to ensure that as it relates to not only the county's tax rate or expenditures and the hospital district expenditures, that we try to bring in a budget that is as efficient and still remains effective as it relates to our expenditures. One of the things earlier I complimented Commissioner Wynn on a survey, though it's an unscientific survey, but of citizens that are...
I'm not a scientist.
Really?
And we went to a town hall meeting several weeks ago, and some interesting results of that survey, and I'll just take a second and read this. Property values are said to have increased by almost 10% in Tarrant County over 2016. This is expected to increase county revenues. At the same time, costs are increasing while the need for services are growing. 42% of the respondents felt taxes should be lowered, which we are recommending to you that we lower the county's tax rate. And 57% felt that they should be left as is, and the increased revenue invested in infrastructure and in other areas. Those areas should include relief to the taxpayer, which we've provided, senior services, transportation, paying down the county's debt, which we have a very low debt rate, and also public safety related issues such as law enforcement. When you look at the hospital district's budget, and under the same survey, the Tarrant County Commissioners Court, obviously we set the tax rate for the district. We know that revenues are going to increase to fund the JPS network. We also know that a needs assessment has suggested that JPS facilities may require renovation and expansion. Additionally, with the growing population, cost of healthcare services continue to increase, and you just heard that from the presentation of the hospital district. 33.8% of the residents felt that the tax rate should be lowered. 66% felt that it should be left as it is, and the increased revenue invested in renovation and expansion of JPS facilities and services, possibly lowering the size of any potential bond or debt issuance. And you just heard about the Future Fund. This is exactly what the Future Fund addresses. So those are some of the things, and Commissioner Wynn, I want to personally applaud you for doing this survey. I think that's, even though it's not a scientific survey, it still is a good gauge of the people in your community that responded.
Right. But I like to add that over 80% of the respondents would like to see some form of a homestead exemption.
Yes, sir.
And that I hope this court will explore and consider next year. Because when you look at the total tax roll, the majority of the tax revenue that local government and local schools collected to operate local governments come from homeowners. I would say, I don't quote me on this, but I would say about 2/3. Am I right, Mr. Wright? No?
No, that's pretty close.
It's pretty close? So 2/3 of the tax revenue collected from property taxes to fund the community college, the county hospitals, the cities, and the schools come from owners.
And Commissioner, let me just make one comment, and we stated it earlier today, as it relates to any type of homestead exemptions, by law, that decision has to be enacted by July 1st. So it could not be applicable to what we're seeing in this next tax year.
So we will look at that next year as we go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
With that, Your Honor, if there's not any other questions, if we could now turn to the agenda and go to item 8A.
Okay. At this time, we will open the public hearing concerning the Tarrant County government's tax rate for tax year 2016.
Tax year 2016, that's correct.
Is there anyone here wishing to speak? Now, I have 3 audience participations. I believe Carl Fors was first, and then Darrell Easton, and then Fran Rhodes. So if you'll come forward at this time and for any comments that you'd like to make. And if anyone else wishes to speak, please fill out the appropriate form and bring it. And as you come forward, please go ahead and state your name, and again, if you wouldn't mind, please repeat your address.
Carl Fors, F-O-R-S, 2300 Harvest Glen Court, Fort Worth, Texas.
Go ahead.
I have copies of these. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram ran a story last week that TAD mailed notices to residential property owners whose values are going up more than $1,000 a year. Property owners with homestead exemptions are protected from increases of more than 10% by state law, said Jeff Law, TAD's chief administrator. TAD has about 580,000 residential accounts. My rate went up 27%. I have copies of that.
Okay.
My rate went, even to the adjustment board, the rate went up 19%.
When you, can I ask a question?
Well, I'm not sure he's finished with his,
I've got more, but those are the numbers you need to deal with.
But the market value may have gone up, but your taxable value would have been limited to the 10% increase.
That's right.
And that's what, when they're referring to a 10%, I think they're referring to the fact that your taxable value, your actual tax would have gone up 10% depending upon what the entity, with each one of the varying entities.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So it was appraised in 2016 for $134,143. It was appraised in 2015 for $98,800. That's an increase of 27%.
But that's the market value, those are the market values that you just repeated, not the taxable values.
Those are the both taxable and market value.
If that is a true statement, then there must be some sort of an error.
There has been an error made. The 2016, after I appeared before the appeals board, the 2016 was $122,000. I have copies of this. And it was still at $98,980, or a 19% increase. I'm saying to you that the property values are based upon that statement. That if you have a homestead exemption, and Commissioner Nijssen, you brought this up, about 80% of the people that want the homestead exemption, right? It's also a violation of the Texas Penal Code, Section 2115, definition of improper photography and visual recording of my property. That's a felony.
Well, that's not something we can really speak to.
I understand that.
But, I mean, have you actually gotten your estimated tax numbers?
I have.
And you have a copy of that?
I have a copy of that.
Could we, I guess, are we doing what we can be doing here, or are we way out of line?
I think you're here just for a public hearing, not for any action.
May I approach? Sure. Other copies of the law?
Well, I'm not worried about, I mean, I am worried about the law, but we can't do anything about that.
I understand that.
Where is the copy of where your actual tax notice that proposes what you're gonna spend in taxes?
They are. Here are copies of them.
Are you saying that you are being taxed over and above the 10% cap, appraisal cap?
That is correct.
That's what you were saying?
I am correct.
Okay.
Your Honor, this indicates that you're gonna be taxed at the same amount.
2016, 2015.
That's correct. The estimated tax amount, according to this statement for 2015 for Tarrant County, was $106.39. For 2016, it is proposing an amount of $106.39.
I understand that.
Okay, so it's the same.
It's the same or less than the same, but my concern was the appraisal district's 27% increase of my quotation. Market value from $98,000.
Well, I understand that, but that's not what they're using to tax you on. They're just saying that that's the market value, and then all of the exemptions apply, and the tax is calculated then based upon the net after that.
Yes, sir, I understand that. They went down $200 in terms of taxable income for this year versus last year. But I want to bring the Commissioner's Court abreast of what the Tarrant County Tax District is doing.
And were you here earlier when we railed on what the appraisal district was doing?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. I wanted to make sure you
I heard
hadn't
all
missed
that.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank you very much for coming forward
Thank you.
tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Forbes.
Let me get to my next stop.
Okay.
Thank you for that. You can have those.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I'd like a copy of those.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
morning,
sir.
Good
morning. My name's Darrell Easton, live at 1005 Fayette Drive, Euless, Texas. Regarding budgets across all 5 taxing entities, I know we're talking about the Tarrant County here now, but I've observed my city, Euless, and their budget planning meetings, went to one for the school district, which I'm in. And I just get the feeling that somewhere in there, when they're doing their budget, they're not budgeting what they need, they're going to budget to what the revenues are going to be, and then they say, well, maybe we better cut the tax rate just a little bit because people are going to complain. You know, my house there in Euless, the market value went up 50%, 49 point something percent. And so it's more important to me what the tax rate's going to be than somebody whose home went down 10 or 15%. So in that regard, I'm more looking at the budgets more for places where they can cut it back, because I'd sure like to see my tax rate down. Our taxes go down. The rate is kind of irrelative because their budget is there. They should budget, then find out, you know, what the appraisals are, and then determine the tax rate after that. I feel they're doing it in reverse. They're saying, this is what we're getting, and then they say, okay. And then because of the 12% gain, and so many people that have their houses jumping 20, 30%, even though the homestead, I don't have a homestead exemption on the house that I call my residence, so as a technicality as well, but I'm going to work on that. So I'm going to be taxed 30%, 50% more if the rates stay the same, and if there's a small adjustment, I'm still going to have 40 or 50% increase. But I don't want to get too much into that. You know, as far as the hospital budget goes, I think they probably could trim a little bit more because it seems like a pretty high jump. The county rate, I believe at a meeting I said earlier, you're going to kind of go between the two and maybe cut it a little bit. So I'm not going to complain too much about that, but I also have on my form that I'd like to address the issues with the Tarrant Appraisal District later in this meeting, if I may. Or do you want to do them now?
I would go ahead and make any public comments you've got right now.
Okay, well, when I got my tax bill, you know, my appraisal bill, I looked at that, 49% increase. Of course, I filed an immediate appraisal or a protest, and I did do that. But then I took my whole street, and I went down and looked through that, and just about every house on there except 3 had significant increases in the appraisal values, 30, and mine was 50. And I said, come on, these whole houses are all built the same year, and so forth. So then I went, looked at my neighbor's house, and hers went down 10%. Almost different floor plans, but exactly the same shape. And we're good friends, so I got her passcode, looked at the comps. 5 out of the 6 comps in her house were the same as mine. And the way I read the appraisal, her house should have went up, probably comparable to mine, but it went down. So I don't know what glitch they had in the computer system that caused that. Now, I love it that yours went down. I don't have any complaint about hers going down, but I certainly have a complaint about mine going up 50%. Now, when I did go down to the appraisal district and went through the appraisal review board, I did get an adjustment. So now I'm only up 39% instead of, or 29% instead of 49%. But of course, the Tarrant Appraisal District does a broad board. They don't come to my house and walk through my house to see what it's going to sell for. So when I looked at the sales comps, you know, I had a realtor dig up all the stuff for this because they're recent sales, and all of the brochures says recently remodeled, new floors, new cabinets, everything else. Well, I haven't done my house that way, and that's probably why I got the adjustment through the appraisal review board, but that worked out. But somewhere in there, also want to talk about homestead exemptions. Somebody said, well, people want them. Well, of course they do. They want to get the taxes down. But actually, that makes it unfair for many of the people in rental properties, in apartment complexes, because when those values go up, they don't have any exemptions. And some of those are the poorest people we have. They're in rentals because they can't afford to buy a house. And I kind of think we overuse the homestead exemption because the people that vote own the houses. And therefore, the politicians react more to what they say than equity across the board. And I realized that because, you know, my homestead exemption went away about 2 years ago due to a technicality. But anyway, I have that realization now that the unexempt people are the ones living normally below the economic level. But we're affecting the owners. The owners aren't, but they're passing that on to the renters. So that ought to be some consideration to give into the amount, especially when it's a percentage. Because in the percentage part, we have $1 million homes getting a 20% reduction. And then we got this other home down here, you know, they're getting a big chunk of tax relief. And the $100,000 home is only getting 1/10 of that tax relief. But the affordability to pay those taxes. Is there, I think, a cap or $5,000 or $20,000, $30,000 on all homes, whether they're homestead or not, whether the owners are, that would equal it out quite a bit more. But that's just currently my opinion. I don't want to take up a lot of time.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Fran Rhodes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Fran Rhodes, and I live at 10613 Elmhurst Drive in Fort Worth. I came here today to register my very strong objection to the tax rates that have been put forward for 2016. The proposed rates reflect a tax revenue increase to the county and the hospital of 2% for the county and 6.2% for the hospital district, for a combined increase of 8.2%. That's comparing the proposed rate to the effective rate, which would give the same revenue as last year. I realize that the costs of everything regarding services to our taxpayers increases every year, and that it's difficult to develop a budget without revenue increases. We all face that. However, as tax-paying families, when our costs go up, we can't just go to whatever revenue source we have and ask for more money. We have to find ways to continue providing services to our families without additional revenue. Social Security recipients did not receive a cost of living increase this year, and most employed persons have not received raises, or if they did, most were less than 2 or 3%. And yet the county is asking for 8.2% combined. Whatever rate you adopt, taxpayers are facing a much higher tax bill due to increased property values. I believe the government should not take advantage of that situation under the guise of lowering tax rates to increase their revenues. If you adopt a rate that is more than the effective rate, it's a tax increase. Even if you adopt a rate that is equal to the effective rate, we are going to be paying more taxes because our property values have gone up. Everybody loves when the property values go up if it's time to sell the house, but nobody likes it when it's time to pay the taxes. So I think it's incumbent upon our governing bodies to look at those numbers and do everything possible to keep the rates as low as possible so that taxpayers don't face these huge jumps because of rising property values. Therefore, I respectfully request that you reconsider the proposed tax rates for both the county and the hospital and adopt a rate that is equal to the effective rate or a rate that is within 1% of the effective rate. Thank you.
Are there any other people wishing to speak to?
Thank you, ma'am.
This time? Thank you very much. Then we will close this public hearing. There's no action that we're going to take at this time.
No, Your Honor, but we do need to make an announcement. We need to announce that the Tarrant County government will set its tax year 2016 tax rate on September 13, 2016 at 10 o'clock in the morning. And it will be in the Commissioner's Courtroom, which is the Tarrant County Administration Building, 100 East Weatherford Street in Fort Worth, Texas.
At this time, I would like to call a public hearing on the hospital district's proposed 2016 tax rate and ask if there's anyone here wishing to speak to this matter. There appearing to be none, then I will close the public hearing.
Your Honor, we'd like to make a public announcement that the Commissioners Court is intending to set the tax rate for the Tarrant County Hospital District for tax year 2016. That meeting will occur and that action will occur on September 13th, 2016 at 10 o'clock in the morning. It'll be in the Commissioner's Courtroom located in the Tarrant County Administration Building, 100 East Weatherford Street in Fort Worth, Texas.
Okay. And our last briefing item, Vinnie, would you come forward on the public health?
Your Honor, as Mr. Tenasia moves forward with that, I would like to make one or two comments. And there was an article in the paper the other day that stated that Tarrant County does not have a vector control plan.
That what?
That Tarrant County does not have a vector control plan or mosquito control plan. I'd like to remind the court that in 2013, the Public Health Department made a presentation to you and presented a plan as related to vector control, and that this Commissioner's Court adopted that. Ever since 2013, that particular plan has been updated by the Public Health Department, and it resides on the county website. It has since 2013 under the Public Health Department's department. Also, I've included a copy of that in your court material, which makes it, it'll be placed in the court record also. And to remind you, if you look at that there are 4 different stages that requires different actions when you get to a certain stage. We're currently on risk factor 3. And so Mr. Tenasia will talk about that as he makes his presentation.
Thank you. So I'm back here again just to give you a situational update on West Nile virus. We continue to see mosquito activity. However, as you look at the number of positive pools coming back, they are ticking up as we progress through the season. Typically, as you would see from previous years, August, September timeframe is peak mosquito activity timeframe, so it's not unusual to see that. Right now, in 2016, we have about 364 positive mosquito pools that have returned out of a total of 3,300 that we've tested so far this year. For understanding, I wanted to point out that 2012, even though we look back to that year as a bad human outbreak year, mosquito data was very limited because 2012 and before that, we had a very small surveillance network on collecting mosquito information. It was more done for just understanding the science purposes versus a real surveillance network. And after 2012, with your support, in 2013, a vast network of surveillance was set up. A lot of our municipalities participate in that. The health department helped distribute about 220 mosquito traps. And some of the municipalities added their own traps to make a very robust surveillance system. And actually that is outlined, the workings of the program are outlined in the plan document. It actually talks about the setup of the arboviral surveillance program and how we monitor and utilize that information. So right now we are seeing an uptake in mosquito pools coming back, but like I said, it's peak activity time of the year, so it's expected to see that. This is a new chart. I did not have that in the previous 2 briefings that we did, and I just wanted to kind of color, in a color-coded way, show you what we're looking at. In 2012, even though our data was very limited, we had only about 600 or so pools that were tested, and only about 85 had come back positive. Most of that activity occurred in July and August. And as you recall me saying that early time frames are more bothersome because that gives more time for mosquitoes to bite people and cause issues. So you can see that the activity started to ramp up in June of 2012. July and August were peak time frames, and then it declined rapidly in September and October. However, at the end of August, somewhere in August, and then in September, we had a lot of human activity during that year. A lot of human cases came back positive. Then 2013, 14, 15, as you can see, most of that activity occurred in later time frames of the year, going as far down as October in 2013. And again, a lot of seasonality, how the weather patterns are, how the sick bird flocks are migrating through our community. All of those factors have, I guess, an impact on how this goes. In 2015, we saw most of the activity occur in August and September. However, this year, what got us worried is that in June, we started to see a ramp up in activity, with July and August is still in progress here, showing heavy activity in an early time frame. So that's just to kind of set the background of where we are at this point. Then you start looking at the percentage positive pools. This sort of correlates with what we see with the number of positive pools coming back. And of course, the 2012 graph looks very high because you're looking at a smaller pool, so that data looks very skewed. But more comparable years to our current year would be 2013, 14, and 15. And we are tracking fairly high at this point. Year to date, we're approximately 11% pools coming back every week as a positive, versus last year we had only close to 9%. Here's a slide that we have started to sort of look at and sort of put more stock in. This is the West Nile virus infection rate per 1,000 mosquitoes that we test. Last time when I showed you, the data was trending significantly high, but as more data has come in, it has started to tick back lower, and that's good news. Also to note is that it coincides with one of the previous year's peaks of 2015. Now, there's no crystal ball, there's no guarantees, but what we saw in the last couple of years, that we had one of those peaks, and usually there's like 2 peaks, and then we see a decline. The picture is starting to form somewhat of that nature, and our hope is that the data continues to back down. But at this point, we don't know, so I can't really say that we're out of the woods, but we're hoping that this downtrend continues over the next several weeks. Vector index, and I've said that this is a very complicated slide even for me to explain, but it takes into account a variety of things, including vector species that was there, what was the density of those mosquitoes that are carrying West Nile, proportional of the infected mosquitoes in the data set, and so forth. And it tries to summarize it all in one slide. It is still high, not as high as the early peak we saw at the end of June, early July, but again, it's not going crazy, so that's good, but we would like for it to come back down so that we're sort of out of the risk range there. And it correlates well in the planning that we have. What this means is that we have high mosquito activity, positive with West Nile, sustained for a period of time. That correlates to our risk level 3 that we outlined in our plan, meaning that we have sporadic cases at this point in human activity, and if the data continues this way or trends higher, the risk of human outbreak is high. When a human outbreak gets underway, that gets to level 4 that's outlined in the plan. And we'll just skip over that. It's just the number of Culex mosquitoes. This slide is important to look, and this is where some of the correlation to mosquito pools and human activity starts to come into play. As you can see, we had some peak-like activity over the last few weeks in mosquito pools coming back, and we're starting to see an uptick in human cases coming back. Now, there's a time lag between reporting and so forth. Usually, once a mosquito bites a person, the incubation period can range from 3 to 14 days. Then the person feels ill, they might try to self-medicate at home for a couple, 3 days. If it doesn't get better, they end up at a doctor's office, diagnostic tests are run, and the doctor takes some time to report it to us. So by the time we get the report, it might be actually a month from the original bite. But usually when we plot it on a chart, we go back to the onset date. So usually it's about a 2-week time lag from mosquito peak activity to human case activity. One of the things that I wanted to point out is that on this slide, which was good as of yesterday morning, we had 12 human cases indicated. As of this morning, we have 15 confirmed human cases. So it is translating to what we were seeing, that there was a high activity period, and we're starting to see some early ramp up in reporting of human cases as well. This is just a correlation between the vector index. As we gain more data from our robust surveillance system over the next several years, we will rely more and more on these vector indices and the mosquito infection indices to be a more reliable gauge of translation into when is actionable time and how it translates into human cases. But right now our data set's limited, so there is limited value, but it's worth looking at. And as you can see that, it peaked somewhere in end of June, and a couple, 3 weeks later, we're starting to see, human cases start to take up. Here's the most recent map that we have. The 300 or so pools that we told you about. Not everything is represented here because they kind of tend to merge under each other at this scale of Zoom. But as you can see, the activity is fairly widespread throughout the county. So with that, in conclusion, and Mr. Manius can help further those comments, we would like to continue to discuss with you the option of having aerial spraying on the table, but also with the understanding that we're currently at level 3, which means that we're monitoring our mosquito data. It is coming back high, and we have sporadic human cases. So what that translates into is the risk of human outbreak is high. So at this point, it's good to consider the option to aerial spray, but when we get to level 4, that's where we'll have to take action and go back and maybe have a ban in the air at that point.
Okay, I guess from that, let me make a couple of comments. As you said, we're in level 3, which says we will consider spraying. And we've begun via this chart to communicate with the cities. I consider the cities our partners in this process. And, as we move toward, we're not meeting next week. We've got a meeting on the 6th of September. I would like for you to make every attempt to communicate with all of our partners and complete this chart so that, at least from my perspective, in order for us to do a county-wide aerial spraying, I would want our partners to agree with that and to feel like that we're not preempting their local control from that perspective. So I'm glad that we're still
haven't responded at all.
Exactly, and that's why I want us to really focus on those who have not responded. We've got, the ones that have said no are Arlington, Keller, and Richland Hills at this point. But I would really like for us to move toward getting this chart more complete.
Absolutely, and that's one of the comments that I intended to make is that we continue to work with our municipal partners. As you can see, it's a work in progress. A lot of times when we reach out to either their staff or the city administration, they obviously have to discuss it with their city councils. So we understand it takes a little bit of time, and that's why we keep bringing the topic up.
And that's another good point. When I'm talking about getting responses, I would like for the city councils to take formal action saying yes or no to us potentially spraying their cities. So, quite honestly, I'd really like for them to be pretty invested. I don't want to, one of the employees say,
does this mean they're paying?
Well, that can be another part of that study or that questionnaire, but that we'll have to address, I think, as a court. But first off, they may object to spraying regardless of whether they're paying or not. And so I'd really like for the city councils to take some formal action about this. And I know many of them meet either weekly or bi-weekly, and so I'd really like to get that going pretty quick.
Your Honor, we had sent out some information to the city managers, and that's how we put this chart together. I will tell you that there are a lot of the cities that are meeting this week that have yet to meet or are meeting today. And so we're
expecting a much bigger response
yes,
up to that point.
I think it's prudent that we go ahead and reach out to the cities and figure out where they stand on this. I don't think that we have yet made the case for county-wide spraying, but it's prudent that we reach out and do the planning in case we do get to the point where we need to do county-wide spraying, because the lead time on getting everybody to agree is so long. Again, I don't think we have made the case through the presentation that you made this morning, Vinny, that county-wide spraying is in order. In fact, I would be more inclined to look at directed spraying. I don't remember.
Targeted spraying.
Targeted spraying. If we're gonna do aerial spraying at all, I don't think that this map and these statistics make the case for county-wide spraying. it would perhaps be prudent if our infection numbers continue to climb, our human infection cases continue to climb, it would perhaps be prudent to look at targeted directional spraying.
And Vinny, if we were to spray, it would also cover Zika virus, not just West Nile, correct?
Right, so it will have some impact, but what I want to clarify is that right now with Zika, we only have imported human cases. So just for understanding of everybody, the mosquitoes do not carry Zika at this point. What we are focused on is preventing the mosquitoes from catching that infection from imported human cases. So that response is very targeted. It's around a 150-yard radius around that person's home. Sometimes it's just one property. Sometimes it can be multiple neighboring properties. So we work with our city partners on a regular basis to do that. Now, when we do aerial spraying, it will have a limited impact on the Aedes mosquito. It's not that it's not going to, absolutely have no impact. It will have some impact, but it won't be the same as you would see with the Culex mosquito. It's just the difference in what time they fly and how they operate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Say you had to go?
Yeah, he's
Commissioner
got,
Johnson?
you're the man.
Okay. We have one other item that we would like to talk about,
All right.
to some limited extent, and that's going to be the, let me get to my agenda here. It concerns the Tarrant County FY17 budgets, and we want to talk to you a little bit about those items that have been parked in the parking lot. Commissioner Brooks, I think that was your term.
Yes, sir.
So I do want,
Do you have a list of all those items that we deferred?
also, I would remind you that the county auditor today announced in court that she's notified the budget department and our department, I think she might, that we have decreased the amount of what we thought was available revenue by an additional $700,000. So at this point, we do not have enough revenue to totally fund everything in the parking lot.
Without going into the reserve?
Not going into the reserves.
Which I'll emphasize this one more time, we do not recommend penetrating our reserves or undesignated. I mean, if we have to do any type of targeted or aerial spraying this year, that has a very negative impact on next year. So we have to always be prepared, and the magnitude is great. It's potentially great.
Debbie, let me ask you.
Sure.
Since nothing has changed for the good since we put these items on the parking lot, wouldn't it perhaps be prudent to wait 2 weeks before we discuss these items? We're not prepared to make any decisions on these items today.
We can do that. Of course, we didn't forward think the cancellation of next week's meeting. That will put us, I think, at September 6th.
That's correct.
We are scheduled to approve the budget on September 13th. Now, obviously, we, on our end, will do anything that's necessary to get the budget ready for the 13th, which is the next Tuesday. But that does limit our time in order to prepare the final documents based on what we decide.
I understand that, but there is no new data on which to make decisions on
The
these.
only thing is the $1.3 million, that is additional cash projections. That has been lowered by $700,000, as we've talked about several times. I'm really not anticipating any large other changes in revenue estimates. Of course, every time we get takes from the appraisal district, we get more comfortable with the data that we have. And of course, while we may anticipate increases, there's also the chance that they could decrease. But we are certainly willing to defer to September 6th.
Well, that's nice of you.
Well, it does put things in a bit of a push. If there's any questions about the information that were presented,
Is everyone in agreement?
Yeah.
We're not ready to make any decisions today.
okay, well, you have the information. If we change anything, we'll try to notify you as soon as possible.
All right? Thank you. Mr. Manus?
Your Honor, I don't believe, Commissioner, I don't believe that we have any other announcements or public comments. Also, we do not have any items to go into closed session today.
Amen. Thank you. Any announcements today? And this meeting is adjourned.